Okay, Assalamualaikum. Hi, my students. We are going to talk about the basic science of breathing. This is an introduction lecture regarding our laboratory activity of the lung function test. So this is my team. Myself, Yuni Susanti Pratiwi. I am from the Physiology Division. We are together with Dr. Putri Halyana. She's from the Anatomy Division, and Dr. Resi Gradia from the Biology Cell Division. We all from the Biomedical Science Department of Universitas Pajajaran. So let's get started. So this is our part one video. This is will cover about the anatomy and the mechanics. Okay, so obviously one of the main roles of the respiratory system is to bring in oxygen so that we can do oxidative metabolism and then to remove carbon dioxide that we produce. However, we're going to be also talking about the very important roles about the regulation of the body acid-base balance in the future session, of course. Keep in mind that because we are bringing in so many liters of air in a day, roughly about 10,000 liters a day of air, and in this COVID pandemic, like that, our lungs have such a large surface area that contact with the something from the environment. So that this is a major site of concern for our defense system, for our immune system. So the respiratory system will have a certain strategies that it used to protect itself from the pathogens. That's something that we are not really going to focus on, but keep that in mind that this is an important factor that the respiratory system has to contend with. Now we are going to see that so many similarities between the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system because again, we're going to talk about the flow. We will consider pressure gradients and the amplitude of that pressure gradient or the amount of the pressure gradient that will be important as well as the resistance. Again, the resistance is going to be related to the radius of the tube. The radius is going to be the fourth power. So the radius is going to make a huge difference in the resistance of the system again. So this is very similar with the what we did in the cardiovascular system, right? So let's continue with the picture of the anatomy of the lung. So in the respiratory system, it starts with the nose and the mouth where the air enters the body, and then the air will enters the trachea, which is a tube surrounded by the cartilage, and then the trachea will going to the uh, mm, branches into the bronchi. The bronchi also have surrounded by the cartilage, and then the bronchi continue to branch more and more until we get to the what we call the respiratory part of the lung. We will talking about surgery in a moment. Okay, keep in mind that also in the respiratory system we have the diaphragm, which is located underneath the lungs. This is a skeletal muscles, so we can consider the respiratory system by dividing into two parts: the conducting parts and the respiratory parts. Our one is the conducting parts. The conducting part is consists about 150 mils of air, and as its name suggests, one of its main roles is to conduct or bring air into the main part of the lung that is going to be responsible for exchanging gas with the blood. So that is certainly one of the roles of the conducting portion of the respiratory system is to distribute air into the rest of the lung. The conducting portion will also warm and moisten the air. We'll talk about a little bit more in the future session. It is also going to have a major role into the cleansing the air. Again, this is gets into the idea that the lung has got to be concerned with all of these liters and liters of air that it's bringing in. The conducting portion is going to cleanse the air, so that's what we call a mucociliary transport system. So the mucociliary transport is consists of some cells lining in the conducting portion, the trachea and the bronchi, which produce mucus that will trap debris. Then there are the cells that have also the cilia. The cilia will move the mucus that contain the debris and beats it up towards the entryway of the respiratory system. So that's what we call about the mucociliary transport system, where we have mucus and the cilia that are going to work together to remove particulate matter and pathogens. The other parts of the conducting system is that in the particular of bronchioles, very similar with the arterioles to control the flow through the system based on changing its diameter. So the bronchioles also have a smooth muscle around them that which help determine how easily air flows into the lung by changing their amount of contraction or relaxation of that smooth muscle. So those are the roles of the conducting portion of the system. The biggest part of the gas exchange is going to be in the respiratory portion of the lung. In here, we have about 3 liters in each at rest. So this is where we're going to have a gas exchange actually, and it's going to be made up of alveoli that have a very thin epithelium that allows for diffusion of gases between the alveoli and the capillaries that are going to receive and dump off gases. So let's talk about a little bit about the alveolar sac. In this diagram, we have three alveolar sac, right? Each one of these structure will be alveolar sac. You can see that it's a spherical structures made up of smaller sphere, and each of these smaller sphere, this is we call alveolus. So the alveolar sac is made up of a lot of different alveoli. So in the inner surface of this alveoli, it's what in contact with the air, and you can see how the outer surface of the alveoli is covered in capillaries. So the inner surface of the alveoli also makes a quite large surface. It's approximately 70 square meters of gas exchange. So this is a very, very large area. And that surface is comprised mostly of type 1 cells. They make up a surface of the alveoli that is contact with the air. So these type 1 cells is very, very flat thin cells. They are the epithelial cells of the alveoli. They are very flat and thin so that the air does not have to go a very long distance to cross the type 1 cells. In between the type 1 cells, there will be a type 2 cells that don't cover as much of the surface area of the alveoli. Actually, they are stem cells. They also produce surfactant that we will discuss in the future session. So you can see how we have this thin epithelium and then lots of capillaries on the other side to exchange the gas between the air and the blood. So we're going to move now to talk a little bit about the ventilation. This is how the truly mechanism that we get air in and out of our lungs. It's going to be really important to remember that the way we get air into the lung is called negative pressure breathing. Basically, we will use our diaphragm, which is a dome shape muscle, and contract it because this is a diaphragm is skeletal muscles. When you contract it, it will become very shorter, so the diaphragm will be flatter. Okay, when it's got flattened, it causes the chest wall to expand, and then when the chest wall is expanded, will be a lower pressure in the lung. So you will have the negative pressures in the lung. That means that the air will flow into the lungs. So the diaphragm is going to be very important when we just doing normal activities like sitting and watching this video like this. You will contract your diaphragm to inhale and then relax the diaphragm to exhale. Okay, but if for instance you going to will have exercise or more active activity, you you're going to want to take a deeper breath. So you are going to want to breathe more quickly, and that's when you can bring in muscle of the rib cage. So they're going to lift the ribs like a handle on a bucket. As you lift it, that will increase again the volume in the lungs. So you can also use them when you're trying to exhale quickly. Many other muscles of the chest wall as well as abdomen muscle. So depending on the type of breathing you're doing, you might use more muscle, but very often just in normal rest breathing, you're using primarily only the diaphragm. The other thing to keep in mind that we will be talking much more about this is the reason why you can kind of just relax your diaphragm and everything just compress. The chest walls get smaller on its own because of the elastic recoil of the lung. The lung wants to get smaller, and that's what helps in that passive exhalation process. Okay, now here's another view of where we contract the diaphragm. We will expand the chest wall, and because of, can you still remember about this, about your physics in the high school, the Boyle's law, hukum Boyle, that when the pressure is just going down, the air will enters. So that means that we are going to have the bigger pressure out in the atmosphere, the air will flow into the lung. So that's we call inhalation. So negative pressure breathing occurs when air enters because of the pressure outside in the atmosphere is bigger than the pressure in the alveoli. So the PA in here is for the pressure in alveoli, okay? So when you inhale and then you often kind of pause between before you exhale, then very rapidly the pressure will equilibrate between the alveolar pressure and then the atmospheric pressure. So between the breathing, okay? And then when it comes to that equilibrium, so the flow is zero. So in between breaths, that's what's going to happen under most circumstances. When we exhale or expire, that's gonna be usually passive process in normal conditions. That's just when thoracic cavity, chest wall, and the lung are gonna return to their normal dimension. As that happen, the diaphragm will become dome shape again, and when the diaphragm relax and go into the dome shape, it will increase the pressure in the lung, so that will make the lung pressure inside the lung pressure is bigger than the atmosphere pressure. So that's why the air will flow out. So that's what we shown here, that where air leaves, the atmospheric pressure is less than alveolar pressure. So again, air enters when pressure in the atmosphere is bigger than pressure in the alveoli. Air leaves between when pressure in the atmosphere is more less than the pressure in the alveoli, and between process the breathing, it will come to the equilibrium, so the flow is zero. Okay, so let's talk about the ventilation cycle. The ventilation cycle is which is going to be the exchange of air between the atmosphere and the lungs. And we can talk about the ventilation cycle, which is one inhalation and one exhalation. We'll be talking of some about the frequency of the ventilation. So let's say how many breaths per minute are you taking? Often it's going to be between 10 until 8 breaths per minute. So we'll be also talking about the tidal volume, which is how much air that you inhale or exhale. That will often about half liter per breath. So using the tidal volume and multiplying it by the frequency of the breathing, we can determine, we call something like a minute ventilation. So this mean that how much air that you bringing into your respiratory system in each minute. So if you're breathing a half a liter a minute, 10 times a minute, then that's gonna be about 5 liters a minute. Keep in mind that we'll be talking about the sum and the depth and the rate of the breathing. This can change to dramatically increase airflow 20-fold. Blood flow can increase threefold relative to the respiratory system. So during heavy exercise, we can make a huge adjustment in basically the minute ventilation. However, if you're going to do that, you will need to have an active exhalation. You don't have any time again to slowly relax and then let the recoil of the lungs happen. You will need to have to be able to squeeze out that air that you can quickly take another breath in, so you will increase the frequency of the breathing. So that process will require those abdominal muscles and the intercostal muscle between the rib. Okay, so let's finish this up by just reviewing that we already talked. We will have this huge interface of a gas exchange within the lung. We'll talk about how it's going to contain a conducting zone, which is what we call a dead space because it cannot have a gas exchange. And then there is a alveolar space, which is a respiratory zone that we'll be talking more about that in the future session. We also talk about some of the basics of how we use negative pressure breathing to get air into the lung, and then how we exhale, and how we are going to have passive exhalation if we are at rest, but that during exercise we will need active exhalation. That one reason why we can have a passive exhalation is just because the lungs want to recoil. That helps drive the process. Okay, see you again at the part 2 video.